wrote decades ago, states the premise a little bit differently, that in any society, there is naturally inequality, because capitalism depends on inequality and human nature produces inequality. But over time, if there are not winds of change and waves of reform, there is a kind of an ossification of a stable system that makes it vulnerable to those with more wealth and power and privilege to turn the operations of the government and the bureaucracy to their advantage. Now, the U.S. has been less vulnerable throughout most of our 2 centuries of history and more to that process, because when our democracy is operating in a healthy way, it produces these waves of reform. And when the public is aroused by perceived injustice and unfairness, then they have a way of getting action. And, you know, an economist told me one time, he was actually the president of Bolivia, and had been an economist. I'm going to draw an analogy. He said, Al, you'll always have inflation, but you've got at all costs to avoid the hyper variety. And by analogy, I would say we're always going to have inequality, but we have to avoid the hyper variety. And we're getting into the hyper variety now. Since the Great Recession, 93% of the national income increase has gone to the wealthiest 1%. You look at the Walmart founding family. Lovely people, Sam and Bud Walton. Between them, they have 5 children, 1 daughter-in-law. Also lovely people. This is not a criticism of them. But those 6 people in the second generation have more wealth than the bottom 100 million Americans. The level of inequality in the U.S. is now worse than in Egypt, worse than in Tunisia. And it is unhealthy for both democracy and capitalism. And by the way, in the outgrowth chapter, I don't know if you want to, I don't want to jump around too much. I want to follow your template here. But the compass we use for constructing America's economic policy, same compass that every company uses and that countries around the world use, is oblivious. It does not measure the distribution of income.